Hello friends, I'm Phil and welcome back to PG Prototypes. In the last episode, I marked out the general idea of the layout and I built the first building, which was only a part of the bigger industry that I wanted to build overall. In this episode, I'm going to continue creating the adjoining buildings for the widget factory. So what I'm doing today is creating a production building, a loading building, and a smokestack with coal stores. This building took me longer than expected, and I struggled to get time for design, construction, and painting because of my tight work deadline. But I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope you enjoy the end result. So in the previous video, I went over the full procedure that I follow to create a building. So rather than cover that all again, I'm going to try something a little different for this video. I'm going to give you a quick summary of the steps I followed and then tell you a bit about the inhabitants of my new shunting layout. Just like before, I started by designing a building in IntelliCAD using the same windows, doors, and heights as the previous building. I adjusted some of the measurements as this would be a bigger building than the previous one. With all the design work done, it was off to the laser cutter, followed by a quick assembly and a light brown spray paint primer. Next, the white acrylic paint mortar as I outlined in the previous video, followed by some dry brushing. Next, I added the windows, the doors, the roof, and all the extra details, and that completed the building. When I was planning this video, I felt that it could get a bit boring to hear the assembly details of a building again, especially because it's very similar to the previous one. I did make some mistakes this time around, and I also tried different construction techniques, but I'll let you see if you can figure them out as you watch the following footage. I really love the idea of having a story behind a layout. I've always enjoyed reading about layouts that were built from childhood memories or were created in the name of having a small piece of heritage that the layout builder really holds dear to them. And I think that on a small layout, a good story can bring that layout up to the standard of a much bigger, more complex layout, just because it adds that extra layer of character. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear that I'm not a UK native, and my layout certainly doesn't follow a prototype, but I'd still like it to have a story, albeit a fictional one. I've come up with a story about the owner of this factory to add some character to the layout. And the next step is to share the story with you as I construct and detail the rest of this building. So I hope you enjoy. Born in 1918 in a small terraced house on the outskirts of Sheffield, Cornelius McGillry was the eldest of 4 children. His father, Alistair McGillry, worked as a coal miner, and his mother, Margaret, took in laundry and mended clothes to help support the family. As was common for many families in this era, money was always tight, and Cornelius left school at the age of 14 to take up work as an apprentice in a local metalworks. His keen mind and natural aptitude for mechanics soon earned him the respect of older workers and eventually a foreman's position by the time he was in his mid-20s. During World War II, McGillry served in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, gaining invaluable experience in machinery maintenance and logistics. When the war ended, he returned to civilian life with a new perspective and an ambition to build something of his own. Using his very modest savings, a small inheritance from a late uncle, and a government loan available to returning servicemen, Cornelius purchased a disused workshop in 1948 and began producing custom machine parts with just 2 employees. His reputation for reliability and craftsmanship spread, and by the early 1960s, McGillry Engineering had grown into a thriving factory with around 80 workers, producing components for the automotive and railway industries. In 1950, Cornelius married Elsie Thompson, a schoolteacher that he had met at a local dance. They had 3 children, Peter, who would later train as an engineer, Margaret, a nurse, and youngest son David, who showed an early interest in the arts. The family lived in a comfortable but unpretentious house near the factory, and Cornelius remained deeply connected to his roots, known for fair wages and supporting apprenticeships for local youth. A practical man with calloused hands and a no-nonsense style, Cornelius McGillry embodied the post-war working-class ethos of perseverance, quiet ambition, and loyalty to community. By the early 1960s, Cornelius McGillry's original workshop, an aging grey brick building tucked behind a row of houses in Sheffield, was no longer enough to meet the growing demand for his precision-engineered parts. Orders were coming in steadily from the car manufacturers in Birmingham and even inquiries from further afield. But cramped space, limited power supply, and difficult access for delivery lorries were holding the business back. Cornelius, ever cautious with money, had resisted expansion for years, but a chance conversation in 1962 with a fellow veteran at a trade fair in Manchester changed his course. The man mentioned an old textiles factory on the outskirts of Derby, disused since the 1950s, that was up for auction. What caught Cornelius's ear was that the site had its own modest but functional railway spur that would cost a small fortune to add to a building not equipped with one. This small but important detail lingered in his mind. Transport had always been a thorn in his side, and rail access, even limited, meant efficiency and expansion. Fewer lorries clogging up the narrow city streets, and faster shipping to clients. After some quiet contemplation over the next week, he decided to visit the site again with his eldest son Peter in tow. Peter was still learning the ropes, but Cornelius always respected his level-headed but enthusiastic approach to the business. Cornelius stood in the weed-strewn yard. Broken boxes and pallets covered the loading docks, remnants of the previous industry, a reminder that an uncalculated risk could end in misery or even financial ruin. But Cornelius was not the type of man to wallow in negativity. He didn't think about the what-ifs. His eyes saw the future possibilities, not the abandoned skeleton of the textile factory. Despite doubts from his colleagues and quiet resistance from the bank, Cornelius put in a bid using most of the firm's reserves, topped up by a second government-backed business loan. Although it was a carefully calculated risk, more than once he lay awake at night wondering if he had overreached this time. The factory needed refurbishing, new equipment had to be bought, and it would take months to make it operational. But Cornelius was methodical. He kept the old workshop running while slowly shifting production to the new site. He hired local men, many out of work since the textile mill shut down, and brought in younger engineers to train under his guidance. By 1964, McGillry Engineering had not only doubled its floor space, but established itself as a reliable regional supplier for the expanding British Rail modernisation efforts and the West Midlands auto sector. His risk had paid off. The railway spur, humble though it was, allowed weekly shipments that cut delivery costs and earned praise from even the most difficult clients. It also became symbolic of Cornelius's vision, practical, forward-thinking, rooted in working-class wisdom, and always just a bit ahead of its time. By 1964, Cornelius McGillry had come a long way from his apprentice days. His newly acquired factory outside Derby hummed with the clatter and rhythm of productivity. It wasn't flashy, and it certainly wasn't large by the standards of the Midlands sprawling industrial estates, but it was his. McGillry Engineering employed just under 100 men and women, most drawn from the local area, former textile workers, metal turners, and 2 ex-servicemen Cornelius had served with in Italy. The factory produced machine parts for rolling stock brakes, engine components for smaller vehicle manufacturers, and precision fittings used in electrical substations. It was steady work, not glamorous, but dependable. Cornelius believed in building things that lasted. Cornelius would have never dreamed it, but a major turning point came in 1966. Britain's economy was wobbling under inflation and competition from the continent. One of Cornelius's largest clients, a regional coach builder, went bust almost overnight, leaving unpaid invoices and a gaping hole in his balance sheet. At the same time, the government's beaching cuts threatened to shutter several underused rail lines, including the modest spur that Cornelius had come to rely on for low-cost shipping of his heaviest goods. The real blow, though, came in the form of a new tender from British Rail. It was a chance to win a contract supplying brake housings for a new fleet of diesel multiple units being tested in the north. The work would secure the factory for at least 5 years, but competition was fierce. Larger firms from Coventry and Glasgow, better financed and politically connected, were circling. Cornelius, unfazed, threw himself into the bid. He worked 14-hour days alongside his foreman and draftsman, refining the prototype. He visited the rail board offices in London, riding the train in a threadbare overcoat, clutching his samples in a leather satchel. His wife, Elsie, barely saw him. Tensions at home naturally rose. The children were older now, but it was still difficult having Cornelius absent for so long. Peter, already working on the shop floor, feared they were stretching themselves far too thin. The factory, as if a living, breathing entity, groaned under the effort. Machines were pushed harder than ever before, and one week the main lathe seized during a critical test run. Cornelius spent 2 nights on the factory floor, sleeves rolled up, fixing it himself. The railboard tender was due in October. The night before submission, Cornelius sat alone in his office, smoke curling from his 3rd pipe of the evening, reviewing every single figure. He knew he couldn't compete on scale, but he could compete on precision, reliability, and delivery time. He submitted the bid, and then he waited. By late November, word came. Against the odds, McGillry Engineering had secured the contract, not for being the cheapest, but for having the lowest projected failure rate and the shortest delivery turnaround. The rail board had also quietly appreciated the use of the spur line, still intact and efficient, avoiding urban congestion. Now, this contract did not make Cornelius rich, but it did cement the factory's reputation. New work steadily trickled in, and the factory remained small, but stable, proud, and known for doing things right. For Cornelius, that was success. He never expanded beyond that site. He didn't want to. Bigger isn't always better, he often told Peter. Better is better. So this video just took me a lot longer than usual to complete. My everyday work commitments were huge, and I was under a very difficult deadline for the past 2 weeks, so I lost all my free time to create this building and to film it. I really would have liked to have added more detail to the buildings. I would have loved to have completed the coal stores, but in the end I just chose to end the build here so that I could release the video today instead of a week's time or 2 weeks time, whatever it would take to complete it. So I had to make some sacrifices, but the end result was still satisfactory. So I still have a good collection of magazines and books in the workshop that I refer to regularly. I haven't adjusted to digital media yet, but I love my old books. And there was an article in Model Railroad some years ago about the detail trap. And I was completely guilty of trying to over detail my buildings and my layout and just never completing projects. So after reading that article again, I realized that it's totally okay for something to just be good enough. Once it's on the layout, most of the details blend in with the rest of the layout anyway, so that's totally fine. Rivet counting is great. It has a place in this hobby. I would love to be good enough to do that, but for my purposes, I just choose this level of detail and I'm happy with it, and it's perfect for me, and that's all that really counts. So I often see people falling into this detail trap, and sometimes it's just not worth it. If you're doing a show layout, absolutely, it's totally worth it. But if it's just something that you're going to enjoy, then I feel it's definitely beneficial to choose a good enough point. I really hope you enjoyed today's video and the first story of my layout. I really enjoyed making it, and although I had to rely on ChatGPT to help me write my story, I got to present the idea I had in my mind about who I thought would own this factory in real life. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of the subscribers. As always, you guys have kept me motivated to see the video through. If you haven't liked or subscribed yet, I would greatly appreciate you doing so, but only if you enjoy the content. Thanks again to everyone for watching, and until next time, keep training.